What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Crypto Airborne in the house, dropping you guys the latest and greatest cryptocurrency news and updates. Today is, what is today? March 23rd, 2022. Today's video, we're going to be doing another streaming of the VGX Heroes Twitter Spaces Education AMA. It's going to be part 3 of our history of money. 1971 and beyond. We got some charts that we've been going over the last couple of weeks. We've been having some good dialogue and conversation going, so we decided to continue it for this week, doing a part 3. So should be some good times. But yeah, before we begin, do a quick market overview, talk about a couple Voyager things here before we start in the next 4 minutes. So let's jump right into that. All right, so let me just refresh it. Market is down only about 0.08%. Bitcoin's been pretty stagnant pretty much the whole day, except the last 10 minutes. It just kind of pumped a little bit. We're almost at $43,000 total, up about 1.35% the last 24 hours. Ethereum up about 1.85%, sitting at $3,031. XRP's not really doing much. Cardano, ooh, crushing it right now, up 13.85%, sitting at $1.11. So I don't know. We might be breaking out here. Not financial advice, but everything's doing pretty well so far. So that's good to see. And Luna up 2.36%, sitting at $95. Top gainers, Krill up 113%. Wow. Crypterium up 55%. Quantstamp up 54.38%. And Loopring, a lot of talk about that, up 45.4%, sitting at $1.18. I think there's some NFT platform that they're going to be building for some company. I forget. I'm not going to say it, but that's, I think, why that's going up. Lagatha, what's going on? Can you guys all hear me okay? Whoever's watching, just want to do a quick audio check. I made sure I switched over to my mic here because last time I had my webcam mic where it sounded really bad, but I think I'm good to go. So just let me know. How about your new favorite coin track? We'll get to that. Maybe. March 23rd holidays, National Puppy Day, Atheist Day, Melba Toast Day. Hey, Lagatha, do you guys celebrate Melba Toast in New Zealand? Chia Day, Chip and Dip Day, Tamale Day, Near Miss Day, Pakistan Day, World's Math Day, and Meteorological Day. World Meteorological Day. Crypto Bubbles. Like I just said, Loop rings up the most. This Mina. Haven't heard of that. It's up 16%, $2.53. Let's just jump into my favorite since we're coming up to 8 o'clock here, Eastern time. Voyager's crushing it right now, sitting at $1.91. Hopefully we'll be able to close the day here in 2 minutes. As long as we don't dump, that's up 2.5%. StormX is up 8.5%. Doge is up, good for my mining, up 5.7%. Ape up 6%. That's pretty much it. Track, yeah. Origin Trail, I bought a little bit of that this morning. It was recently listed on Voyager earlier today. I know Winston Churchill bought about 10 grand of it, and he pumped it up to like $1.81. This is a little off. I'm pretty sure he pumped it because right after he did that, the price jumped up. I should have sold it then, but we'll see. It actually looks like a pretty decent project. I'm not going to get too deep into it. We only got 1 minute to go. I don't even have enough time to get through everything I need to. Maybe I should start this about 10 minutes prior to the Twitter Spaces. But yeah, I don't know. Keeping my eye on Origin Trail and doing a little bit more research on it. But it looks promising. They got a lot of good partnerships. Total crypto market cap 1.91 trillion on TradingView, but I do believe we are above 2 trillion. As CoinGecko states, up 1.1%. We're at about $2,037,223,786,901. Bitcoin dominance down a little bit today, 42.59%. It's probably why you see some alts starting to pump. Whenever Bitcoin dominance is low, usually when the alts pump. Fear and greed updates in 12 seconds. Yesterday, we were at 26 fear. Now we're at a fear 31, and in 6 seconds, we're at 31. I'm going to say we're going to go up because it's been a pretty green day. A little bit. I'm going to say 34. So let's just refresh it here. Oh, it's off by 6. 40, still in fear. So that's good to see that we've gone up a little bit. That's pretty much all I got for you guys. Again, Voyager, they're doing this celebrating 100 tokens giveaway where they're going to be giving away $100 of every token they have on the platform. And then, like, I think 100 other winners or 9 runner-ups win $100 in VGX. Make sure you guys check that out. Also on their Instagram, they have this little filter thing, which is kind of cool. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but if you guys are on Instagram, they come out with some different things on there. I'm not going to play the sound, but they have this little thing you can add. I don't know, just something different. Nobody said anything. I don't know, Instagram, they post things here and there about it. But yeah, let's just jump right into the Twitter Spaces. Glad you guys could all join today. I'll be popping in and out of the comments section, getting timestamps. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. And let me just pull up Edge here, refresh it, and we'll get it going.
Hello. I appreciate everybody joining us here tonight. We're going to get started here in a little bit. If you could do us a favor and hit the bottom right tweet button, share the space, get new people in here. We're going to get it going. We're finishing off WTF happened in 1971, starting off on slide 11. So we're going to try and run through these, finish up with this. But yeah, so just stay tuned. We'll get started here in just a little bit. All right, we can get it started. A few more people joining, but I'm Pepe Sloan, VJX here at 10. Kind of heard my spill, so pass it over to Ross. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Just getting done with a long day at work, but happy to join everybody here and shoot the breeze.
Love it. Wonder Woman, how are you doing tonight?
I'm feeling real good. I'm happy to be here and excited to dive more into this topic.
Love it. And Floki just pinned where we're going to be starting tonight. So here in just a little bit, just look right there and you can find all our charts and find the full thread. But speaking of that, Floki, what's going on?
What's going on, Pepe? I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Doing well as always. I can't complain. Once again, appreciate you putting all the charts in one thread, making it easy for us. But Sun Tzu, what's going on, my friend?
Hello. I am Sun Tzu. I've been awake for 18 hours, and I'm ready to learn some stuff.
I love it. I knew you were quiet tonight. I was figuring you must have had a long day. But Michael, what's going on, my friend?
Not much. Looking forward to wrapping this up. I swear we're finishing this topic tonight. All the fun ones are in the chart at the end of this. So I'm looking forward to these. These are the ones I've been waiting to get to for the last. These are the ones I've been waiting to get to for the last 5 hours. 3 weeks and 5 hours of talking about this. So we're getting there tonight, I swear.
Yeah, without a doubt, we're finishing. We didn't expect it to go to 3 parts, but we just want to hit on all the charts and really kind of get the point across before we kind of summarize it and move on to our next topic, petrodollar, next week. So that'll be good stuff. But Felix, we can kind of kick it off with you tonight, taking over the current events.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. So current events, I think, we all fully aware what's going on in the Ukraine and with Russia. Specifically, recently, we're seeing a lot of back and forth with Ukraine. Retaking some cities, then Russia moving to other parts, while Ukraine is moving in on certain cities. Mariupol is still being heavily contested. Ukraine is looking to regain control there, and we're seeing the fallout, of this war now being reverberated in Asia. Specifically, China and India are still entrenched with a coalition with Russia in support, or to say at least being non-condemning of the situation, and that will allow the ability for Russia to continue to move some assets and make trades and pretty much try their best to mitigate the sanctions that have been imposed to them by Europe and the United States and other nations. Asia specifically is also starting to feel some of the bite of the inflation of this war, with some of the previous contracts that they have with Russia and even the Ukraine itself. And now, because Ukraine's exports have also been affected, things like wheat and steel. So you're now going to start to see some effect there coming soon in terms of those prices, and some places are going to feel it a little faster than others. We've heard recently the unfortunate news of a plane crash in China. There's still a lot of cloudiness there in terms of the detail and the specific, but it was a very tragic and unfortunate event. So our hearts go out to everybody, unfortunately, there. That's pretty much it for the current events. There's always a lot of stuff going on. We just wanted to touch on some things that affect the markets and affect us, here in Heroes and all of you guys. So kick it off.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, I heard about the wreck in China, but I haven't had time to kind of look into it. I knew they were, I think they just found the black box. So do you have has anything came out about what caused it or anything? Anybody know?
I mean, right now, the first round of speculation is it looks either completely systematic with the nosedive or intentional by pilot. So again, I definitely hope that we can get some answers yet, because it's definitely something you don't see.
That being said, it was not the 737 MAX. It was it was the earlier iteration of the 737. So this is not in line with the prior crashes in Ethiopia and whatnot that was related to the MCAS system. Right. So it will definitely be interesting to see what ends up coming from that black box.
Yeah, it's also not in line with physics and like what would happen to an aircraft. So from what I understood, I haven't actually seen the video, but the impact was near vertical, and it was just a complete nosedive from what I heard about the video that's circulating out there. And I did see some other VGX heroes had some basic aviation experience, or so I saw some people, I think, reaching out to Padak because they know that he's got a plane. But I mean, if an aircraft had an engine failure, it doesn't go vertical. If an aircraft had any kind of power loss, it doesn't go vertical. It just essentially turns into a glider that's heavier and has a worse glide performance than a glider, but it still flies like a glider. So for it to have been perfectly phased down, typically if it's going to be a systematic failure, it's usually something that would happen in accordance with icing, because of a lot of times inexperienced pilots, like what happened with the Colgan air crash that happened up in Buffalo. If you use autopilot during the accumulation of ice, the autopilot systems are stronger than the pilot is physically. So when they disengage that autopilot, it sometimes can then put the aircraft in an unmanageable position and flight attitude that the pilot is not physically strong enough to overcome. But I don't believe that this was in any kind of environmental conditions that would have led to that amount of ice either. So I would be remiss to speculate, and I'll let them go through the black box and all that. But the statistical likelihood would be something pilot induced and intentional, because it's even with that fairly difficult to impossible to get that aircraft to actually go vertically into the ground. Yeah,
not to get too off going down the rabbit hole on it, but I did see something like from its before it started descending to where it crashed. It was like only 4 kilometers or something. Pretty insane. But yeah, sorry to get off topic. Ross, you're taking over current events as well for US.
Okay, so probably the biggest thing of news here recently was the rate increase. I don't know about y'all, but I've already received emails from several of my credit providers that have talked about increasing their rates. Not received any emails from my bank about increasing their rates. Don't be surprised if you're not able to pay off credit cards, if there might be a bigger bite that you're having to pay as a result of the increased interest. In addition, the confirmation hearings of a new potential Supreme Court justice. That's been, I think this is the 3rd day that they just wrapped up of the confirmation hearings. For the most part, it's been fairly uneventful. There have been a couple of little things here and there that have grabbed some headlines, but for the most part, from my perspective, it does look like she will end up being confirmed. There seems to be enough bipartisan support. Additionally, Desantis down in Florida has made 2 announcements regarding, first one regarding citizens being able to pay their taxes with crypto. And in the vein of our efforts here, it was also great news to see that Florida has now become the largest state to mandate financial literacy for all high school students to graduate. So I think that'll be beneficial for everyone in the long run, just to understand, how our money works. As far as the markets, and probably Obi can speak to this a little bit more as well, but one of the bigger things that I saw is related to the market was a recent bet that Kwon made of Terraform Labs, Luna, with regards to a 1-year bet, approximately $10 million between a few different individuals, regarding whether or not Luna will be higher a year from now. What's come from that, though, that I find more interesting and I think is more important for everybody in the crypto space is that Terraform Labs is now also increasing their Bitcoin reserves. I think from what I've seen, they've already allocated about 250 million of initial $3 billion intent to build up their reserves with Bitcoin. That doesn't necessarily mean that Luna is transitioning or UST is transitioning to a Bitcoin-backed system, but it's just more so as kind of like a stopgap. It's still going to remain an algorithmic coin. There's also discussions that that group is planning on building up approximately $10 billion in Bitcoin reserves. So, King's still going to be ruling a lot of this space. So it's always nice when there's huge allocations by some large investors with regards to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And love it. Yeah, I saw the stuff they were doing with that, and it's super fascinating to kind of see a Bitcoin backed or semi backed. But yeah, guess we can move it along to the charts.
Unless Obi-Wan, I see you pop up here if you wanted to chime in there. Any additional insight?
No, Ross got it pretty good. It's just a treasury reserve for the ecosystem, and eventually people will be able to buy Bitcoin with their UST natively on chain. And like you said, Luna and Terra still have the algorithmic seniorage model to the stable coins are minted from the Luna balance, not from Bitcoin. That's a misconception.
Right on. So yeah, as we get started here, you will see 2 tweets at the top of this from me. The one on the right is actually a link to the Crypto Airborne stream. So if you want to just pull that up on another screen or, tablet or phone or whatever, you could sit back and relax. Thank you, Crypto Airborne, as always, for doing what you do for us and recording these and streaming these. I highly recommend it. I'm doing it. And so the dot on the left will always be the most recent slide that we are on. And yeah, take it away, fellas.
Well, actually, I'm going to take it away first. I'm going to actually just give a brief summary, kind of recap of where we're at in the charts, since it's been a few weeks, and potentially some of y'all haven't been here for the past few weeks. And also for context of this conversation, we're going to go through all of the charts, and then all of us up here are going to do a little bit more of a discussion about it and main takeaways. So the end also has some real juicy content that we're going to have. But for right now, context of what we are doing is that we're discussing all of this financial, socio-cultural, all of these major changes that happened right around 1971 and how they dramatically impact us and the entire world today. And not that they're all extremely, not that there's major causation, there's some causation, but there's a ton of correlation of all of these things landing right around 1971 at the same time. And then there becomes a bit of causation as some of these changes really accelerated other social financial changes. So a major one financially being Nixon, the decoupling of gold from the gold standard from the US dollar. And the US dollar was the Federal Reserve currency at the time, so it completely destabilized the world's currencies, removed the anchor of the US dollar. I'm not going to go more into it at the moment, but that was a major issue or event, I should say, of 1971, and ties into lots of the other changes that we're going to be going into in all of these graphs. And anyone else have anything to say on that?
No, I think that for anybody that wasn't along for the ride, this is what, the 8th episode. So this is hours 14 through 16, 14 through 16 of basically the history of money and where we're going with this. So we started with basically what is money and defining time preference, and then we went through all historical monies and monetary metals and the rise and fall of empires. So we're getting closer and closer to where we are now, because this is all important foundation for people to understand why, as a country, we're in the position we are economically, and even at the global level. And really where we go from here is what's happened since the 70s. So that's where the petrodollar system becomes so key to understand, and it's so just woefully undertaught. So most people really don't have a clue that the basis of the petrodollar system since then. So 1971 is a key inflection point in monetary history. And then we're pretty much probably 2 episodes away from really being caught up to snuff, and then we'll get into some more fun little tangents that we can dig into. But just so everybody knows pretty much where we came from, where we're going, it's all tied together. There's kind of a master plan here, but looking forward to wrapping up this 1971 topic tonight, because there are some real fun charts that we can really kind of dig into deep. So it's why we kept it a little light on the foreign policy and current affairs tonight, so we could just dive in, because we will finish this tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. But if anybody has anything else to add before we start on the charts? All right. So we're starting off on slide 11, top left, federal surplus / deficit. So starting off, you can see it's essentially 100% flat besides late 40s. And then it takes a downward spin. Then in the late 90s, peaks up positive, and then it starts drastically declining. So yeah, Mike, would you like to touch on that anymore? Kind of go in
Sure.
more depth.
No, I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, we were fairly good at living within our means as a country up until the 70s, and then pretty much fell off a cliff. You know, we had a little blip of prosperity that brought us above the neutral line there in the late 90s up to like 2001, and then fell back off that cliff. And when we fell all the way hard. We went full nosedive. So we kind of suck at holding to a budget and, you know, living within our means, and that only gets worse. And unfortunately, a lot of the current model relies on us continuing to spend more than we can afford in order to service debt that we can't pay back, and then we'll just create more debt to create more liquidity to pay back future debt, and it's why we crypto, right?
Definitely so. And kind of a point kind of Floki made when we were in the pre-call is just how the peaks have kind of been off war, and besides that, we just been relative straight downhill. But we can move it on to we're going to skip over federal receipts and outlays. I believe in that, right, Michael?
Yeah, it's repetitive. It's more of the same. I think we get it. Even the next slide after that, the U.S. commercial bank assets and that are U.S. government secured and the Federal Reserve balance. Money printer go burr. I think we've all at this point revolved an investment thesis around that. I think we know that they're backing more and more and more and more and more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, this is another that's not up to date with the even more printing on top of it. But we'll move it on to the S&P 500 PE ratio. Just kind of speak.
This is definitely one that kind of spoke to me because, you know, historically, as far as equity gains, in the long run, you're conservatively can expect around 8% a year, 8 to 10%. But now, with these valuations of the market, I mean, stocks that were traditionally trading at 15 to 20 price to earnings ratios, now they're trading upwards of 40, 45 plus price to earnings. And we're not even talking about high growth stocks. We're talking about, you know, sometimes they're just consumer goods stocks. And that is significantly out of whack from what we have typically seen even a decade ago.
Yeah, I also would point out too on the working hours to buy the S&P 500 and the impact. One thing that's really kind of escalated that after 1971 is in 1978 we started rapidly moving away from pensions and into 401k plans, which started in 1978. So the escalation of the S&P and the cost of the S&P really, really takes off when employers started offering their employees 401ks as a pension replacement or supplement. And of course, the evil thing they do to us is they cap how much we can contribute to our Roths and our 401ks because they don't want us to make, you know, put too much of our money in assets and retire too early. They want to keep us working a long time so we can theoretically pay the higher taxes when we're older.
Yeah, they can't give us that much tax-free money.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's not tax-free, it's tax delayed. And they'd rather not have us retire early. They want us working late and dying early.
Absolutely. I was more so thinking a IRA, but for post-tax investing. But yeah, good point on the 401k. But yeah, he was kind of speaking on, so if you move to slide thread 12 of 22, the top right, it's working hours to buy the S&P. So just showing the drastic, or after 1971, there was a downtrend, and then it's been drastically up from there.
Yeah, so essentially 1980 onwards, that's, you know, the breaking the correlation from the gold standard, but, you know, the basically discontinuation of pensions and the escalation of 401k really made that skyrocket.
Yep, and we're also going to see later in some of the subsequent slides that the inability of pretty much the lower quartile to save in any capacity, which ties back into what we talked about all along since we started the second season with time preference, and then kind of government predicated time preference, where they try to indoctrinate the people into having high time preference basically out of necessity, because they don't have the discretionary income to see the world in any other way or through any other lens. We'll see that here in a few slides, as far as the inability of people to save, and obviously then you become priced out of investing, and you see that lower quartile kind of further bifurcate from what then gets stereotyped and characterized as the elite. But it's that lack of discretionary income to do anything with, other than operate on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis. The inability to actually have investment assets in something that does perform better than the US dollar is really a lot of what has led to the inequities that we currently see.
Absolutely.
And for those that are interested, there is actually a metric that's commonly used by economists and social scientists called the Gini index, which is a conservative metric basically trying to determine wealth inequality. And interestingly enough, the U.S. was actually in a pretty good shape as far as wealth inequality prior to 71. But as inflation has exacerbated, it has definitely kind of fed into some of the wealth inequality, especially relative to other established sovereignties.
All right. So we can keep it moving. So we move on to, let me get my bearings again. The bottom left on thread 12, speculation versus production. Sorry. So from you can see starting off in the 60s to the 70s, speculation or volume of futures trading was extremely low, and from then it's been drastically up. Do you think something taken into account on this is just like the development of investment instruments? But it's still fascinating to see the difference and how off production is to speculation.
The big thing here to point out on this chart is that how gold has been manipulated since 1971. So when we went off the gold standard, when people wanted to start storing their wealth in gold, and the government would prefer that we didn't, and they tried to shift a lot of money to stocks, they've been manipulating the gold market since the 70s in a very heavy way through the future trade. And they're doing the same thing today with Bitcoin since 2018, when the Bitcoin futures market opened with the CFTC on Chicago trade market. So this is a common tactic that's used to really kind of suppress a commodities market, and it's one of the reasons why they're not approving a spot ETF, is because they know if they approved a spot ETF, Bitcoin would really start to move. They'd rather have the institutions get their trading exposure through a futures market, which doesn't actually impact the underlying asset supply.
But Obi, Gary Gensler's protecting me with the futures ETF.
Yeah, if anybody wants to do a fun little experiment, Google JP Morgan gold fine, and you'll see they get fined like almost on a monthly or quarterly basis for manipulating the gold market. So it's very common practice to suppress superior stores of value, and this is the vehicle in which they do that.
Yeah, you also had kind of the perfect storm here, because you had all that going on. You also had the obviously the devaluation of the US dollar, and you then couple on top of that the proliferation of technology, especially computing power. So I don't know. I think most people in this community are familiar with the Nigerians, like John and Pete Nigerian. But if anybody's ever read their book, there's some fascinating history there as to how some of the early derivatives markets worked, and even just some of the normal pits, like on the CBOT and really any of the pit-based trading floors. But they would hire ex-NFL players because they were large men that were physically capable of muscling their way into a pit with a sheet of paper to actually execute a trade that no one else could finagle their way in there. So John and Pete Nigerian are both ex-NFL players, and that's how they got their start on the trading floors, is that they were actually sought after because they were just huge and physical and able to actually finesse their way into the pits and get trades through. And once that became a computing task and not a physical brute force task, you could now not only do that without that, 1 in a million physique, but you could do it at a rate of, orders of magnitude faster, larger quantity, done from anywhere. It's completely revolutionized the ability to actually place these futures trades and run these markets. So it created these, digital market makers, and the world that we now live in. It sounds insane to actually think of how these trades were executed pre-computers.
And now you have essentially these large firms that, even with high-speed fiber optic cable and stuff like that, they're literally trying to move a block closer to the actual exchange so that they can get those trades executed. We're talking milliseconds faster. Mm-hmm. And it's literally just trying to front run some of the other institutional traders, because a lot of these guys are trying to make the exact same plays. And so when you get to the point from having to shove your way into a pit to get an executed trade to now trying to literally move your operations, hundreds of feet closer to the exchange just so you can get a little bit quicker execution, it really has progressed real quickly.
Yeah, lowering the latency, right? They're lowering the latency of the fiber optics network to get their quantitative bots to trade faster.
Exactly.
And the other thing is that there's over $2 quadrillion in derivatives and futures, right? This is where all the big money is made, right? Is trading these things.
Yeah, I wish Frankie was on tonight because he's got a career of experience on Wall Street, and I don't know how much of it's secret squirrel knowledge or what he could share, but I know I've heard in his social circles in person just some war stories of all the different firms competing for that high frequency trading, and just that proximity that was already mentioned here, and it's just it makes you think too about these companies that are giving you free commission free trading, and basically with payment for order flow being able to front run you in a fraction of a millisecond. So the retail audience really never stands a chance of even capitalizing on the benefits of their own trade, whether it's a good idea or not. You can easily be front run by all the king's horses and all the king's men without ever really standing a chance. Felix, I said your hand up.
Yeah, no, you actually, Mike, you literally just touched what I was wanting to hit on is how the retail is literally on the low end of the stick, and there's absolutely no way that you stand a chance. It just
PFOF is a bitch, man. And if you're getting a product for free, what you don't realize is that you are the product, and it's true across all circles, including I think in Voyager we all know that they make their money from spreads, and free is never actually free. But I think there's a lot of Robin Hooders out there, and pretty much since the entire industry went commission free trading, a few years ago. I don't think most people realize that once commission free trading became standardized, you became the product.
Yeah, the payment for order flow is a big problem. Did you see Robinhood also announced that they're trying to put out their own debit card? Everybody wants a debit card to do roundups and investing to make it even more automated for payment for order flow.
I have a Robinhood debit card, actually. It's just a standard, deposit money pay. It's not a routing, but funny you said that.
It's like a crypto.com card where you got to load it. But yeah, it's just another tool. Everybody wants to offer a card today in this market. Anyways, thought I'd mention it since it was news this week. they're going to be enhancing their card program. So carry on.
All right, so I think we're good to move on to market capitalization by sector. So it just kind of makes the point, 1971, financials were the lowest of the sectors compared to the other and then the resource on the chart. But since then, it's become the highest market capitalization sector. Anybody have anything they want to add to that before we move on?
It just kind of echoes the narrative of, you know, speculation building asset mechanisms were valued more than, you know, traditional goods and services and merchandise.
Absolutely. Well, we can keep it moving. So United States personal savings rate, and then the next slide would be net savings. So these kind of hit on the same point we've made as, you know, the dollar depreciates, people aren't saving as much, as well as, you know, people just don't have the money to save. But Michael, you have anything else you want to add to that?
We're on a new slide, by the way, guys. Slide 13.
This is the one that I was referring to, and I think the next one too, as far as that just government force-fed high time preference. You just see that people got beaten down from 1971 through the crash in 08 to the point where savings rates were incredibly low, and then it's just spend. You know, and you're disincentivized to save when your money's not going to retain value from one year to the next. And a lot of those folks that didn't choose to save also couldn't save. And if they had been able to save, they really needed access to a market that actually would have maintained par, whether that be, you know, a gold market or a S&P index fund or ETF or something along those lines. But this really just drives the point home, the extent to which it became commonplace in our society to just not save and live in the moment.
And the great layoffs and the Great Recession there in 2008 to 2010, the last major recession that we had, saving rates went negative, which means people went into debt as banks were being bailed out because they were too big to fail. Another ironic part of that slide.
And also, like, on top of how common it was to start building debt and the great increase in credit card use, it probably also indicates both the increasing cost of goods and the stagnation in income. So that ratio goes down, meaning you can't save as much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all great points. We can keep it moving to trade balances. So on 13, the bottom left and bottom right, they're kind of pointing the same picture. I believe the bottom right does a little bit better job of kind of being clear and just showing we went from a net exporter to a net importer significantly since 1971.
And if you think this is bad, I wish you could see this same chart for Europe. That's why Europe is so fucked right now with the Russia situation. Because if you look at the same chart, they produce nothing, especially the Mediterranean countries. Germany is always taking care of itself. France is usually pretty good at taking care of itself. But a lot of the Mediterranean countries are completely over a barrel right now. No pun intended.
And I think our slide is even worse beyond 2015. In terms of U.S. merchandise, you know, we run a $1 trillion trade deficit. So we're not producing as much, right? We shipped a lot of low, you know, manufacturing jobs overseas because of lower cost wages, right? And if we're going to try to avoid another Great Depression or recession, we need to start manufacturing things here and becoming a net positive exporter. But this is prior to, in the 1970s, that was the case. We produced a lot of the world's goods. Right now, we're mostly farming and technology, agriculture and technology. So wanted to call that one out.
So are you saying we need to make America great again or build back better? Just kidding. Don't answer that. Please don't answer that.
I do think with the Made in American is a worthwhile slogan. We can bring that back from the 80s.
I don't see that with just capitalism and how it plays out unless, there's uniform, like, working standards for all countries. People are just inevitably just going to keep moving to cheaper and cheaper countries.
Well, they're not really cheaper though, right? They're just better at manipulating their currency. And that currency manipulation is really, if you look at like the foundation of Keynesian economics, even from like his seminal work in 1937, he clearly stated if you looked at, so this is a little fact that I came across earlier today. If you look at the German release and the German translation of Keynes's thesis from 1937, when it was released in Germany at the time, there was a translation in there that included that that the entire thesis of Keynesian economics functions better in a totalitarian state than a laissez-faire capitalist state. And it was basically just the lack of any kind of checks and balances to mitigate the money fuckery. So if you look today, like, who's better at money fuckery than China? Nobody. We talk about how failed our own system is, but we don't even have a yellow belt in the grand scheme of things compared to the money fuckery at a global level. So we will never be able to compete with that, and that's another level of just macro that nobody understands.
Yeah, great insight to that. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, and specifically in China, they've been manipulating their currency since they opened their doors up. They were very, very protectionist for centuries, not even decades. I mean, sometimes we just think in decades, the way we look back at what happened from FDR to Nixon and all these things. This is something that for them is actually goes back centuries, and they've made a stark change and completely opened themselves up, and they've done it the right way. If that was the goal, was to completely change how the game was played and how they can maximize their currency to the utmost fuckery as possible. The yuan is literally that.
The digital yuan is that on steroids.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kind of speaking on China, Jarnell Stokes, I believe next Monday he's going to be on back at Daytona, and me, Michael Floki, and a few others, Airborne, met him. He's kind of talking about China's economy and how they don't really have any cash. It's just all payment through phones and stuff. So I can only imagine what the digital yuan, the manipulation behind all of it.
Yeah. All right. So I found the actual quote here, right? So this is how Keynes introed his own book in the German translation that was released in 37. The theory of aggregate production, which is the point of the following book, nevertheless can be much easier adapted to the conditions of a totalitarian state than the theory of production and distribution of a given production put forth under conditions of free competition and a large degree of laissez-faire. That's always good when your basis of your economic model relies on totalitarianism. That's really worked out well for all these other utopian economic models.
All right. Yeah, definitely. So that's good. That's a good quote. But we can keep it moving to thread 14. So started off the cost of a barrel of oil. As we know, this is an updated chart. It left off when we were at negative. Since then, with Russia, Ukraine, it's spiked way back up to, I think it's currently at 112. But the chart's just kind of showing how originally up until 1971, 74, kind of in that range, oil was relatively flat. And then since then, it's skyrocketed besides a black swan event like coronavirus.
Now, one thing that kind of I was kind of curious about, I couldn't really tell from the chart, was this adjusted for inflation, or is it's purely just nominal terms?
It says nominal at the top of the chart.
Yeah, so I mean that's important to keep in mind that adjusted for inflation, we're talking about a much higher magnitude than even what that graph is really showing.
Yeah, the last time we entered the Middle East, towards the end of the Bush's term, that's when it was the highest, around 140. It's 123 today, so not quite caught up with where we were when we were taking Saddam out, but it's rapidly approaching those levels.
What did it peak out at what, I believe a week or two ago? I know it got pretty close to the all-time high.
Is the 140 is 139 is the high, and the last 52 weeks, and 140 was where it was on this chart as the highest. So right up against the chart top. But to Ross's point, adjusted for inflation, 140 in today's dollars is less than 140 in the dollars in 2006 or 7. But still near all-time highs.
Yeah, that's a good point on the adjusted for inflation. But we can keep it moving to the interest rates and the government bonds. I don't know if OB or Ross, y'all want to touch on this? I know it's not me and Michael's expertise.
Ooh. I wish Frankie was here. I'm probably not the person to speak on this one.
I mean,
no, the one we misses.
The S&P 500 is my bond. But no, I mean, you'll hear the 2 versus 10 yield inversion curves, and you'll hear the 10-year is kind of what tracks a lot of the market tracks to, as a kind of a dollar proxy, kind of how the health of the market, and where it sits today, it's not very healthy, and it's teetering on signs of recession. So I don't think we need to go much deeper than that. That's just the current state of affairs.
Here's what I would suggest. If anybody's unfamiliar with Greg Foss, go ahead and find him on Twitter and search for him on YouTube and watch a couple episodes of him doing interviews or podcasts, because he is probably the foremost expert on the topic that I could think of on the planet. And he delivers it in such a passionate and interesting way that I think that he can hold your attention for 45 hours on bonds better than I could hold your attention for 45 seconds.
So my suggestion, to make it real simple, buy Bitcoin, not bonds.
True. Couldn't stop it.
But we can keep it moving to thread 15, the top left. So this is starting to get into a energy, what's the word, argument from 1971. So we can touch on this one a little bit. It's the energy and real GDP per capita aggregate figure. Felix, did you want to touch on this one a little bit?
Yeah, this one, we kind of touched a little bit, looking over to them. Oh, you want to say hi? Say hi. Maybe, with my daughter. There's still a lot of information to kind of to look at, but before 1971, you can see that there was a correlation to, how we develop, how we use energy, and then we see a match with GDP. Then after that time, you can see there is a deviation. Now, this may actually be you can look at it from one aspect as maybe possibly a broke Keynesian, if the point is to flatten energy or reduce it, but also increase GDP. This achieve that. But the question is always, is it real? And as we've seen with the issues that come about doing that way, it's not real. So that's kind of the bad news hook to this. And I know Michael has a great other angle on this.
Right. So we talked ourselves in circles a little bit in the prep call about this, just trying to figure out what the narrative that they're trying to convey is here. But I think that Felix just laid it out well as far as what the Keynesian would see in this. As far as what the Austrian would see in this is, I think that Austrian economics would basically correlate energy usage as an indicator of the success and viability of civilizations throughout time. And then the more evolved and successful they became, the more that they needed to consume and use energy. So there was a correlation between the two. And I think that if you actually took this chart and saw that they were operating fairly in parallel, that supports the Austrians' thesis that there's a very close correlation between the success of civilizations and the energy that they produce and use. And I think that an Austrian would use this to try to eviscerate the ESG narrative, because this, obviously, the bifurcation of this curve predates any major politicization of climate change, global warming, ESG, any of the buzzwords, right? So this clearly jump tracks way before then, before it was politically, marketable. So since 1971, GDP has gone up per capita, but in non-nominal terms, because adjusted for inflation, your actual value of those dollars is not really what it was pre-1971. Whereas energy use stagnated. So this would be probably used by an Austrian to show an overall stagnation in the progress of our civilization as a whole, while we have this artificial blue line that continues to just take off for the heavens, but it's in non-real terms.
I think that's interesting about this is it's almost exactly like one of the very first charts we looked at, maybe the first chart we talked about in part 1, where the blue line represents GDP and productivity, and the red line, which basically looked the same as the one here with energy, was wages stagnating over time. It's almost an identical chart, and I find that really fascinating. The other thing too, just on the whole ESG part, that's just another form for governments to make money. But global warming is real, but the monetization of carbon credits and the politicizing of our planet is not. Anyways.
I appreciate you saying that, because I felt the exact same way when I was putting these charts together. I was like, this is starting to look familiar, even though, these are different subjects, different areas. So thanks for articulating that.
And I think this decoupling also, since traditionally there is the correlation between energy, electricity use, and production of a country, it also shows possibly moving away from a manufacturing economy, which I know is part of what Michael was saying, since manufacturing, making things, usually correlates with an economy's success. So it's partially that of moving away. I mean, we make a lot of things still, but it's moving away from doing a ton of industry. And also, I'd say like the continuation of this line, so the red line, I mean, being so stagnant is also more energy efficient, like energy policy in the US and how that led to a mass scale of efficiency in things like appliances, I would say is a big part of that continued stagnation.
We had a really big effort in the early 90s, late 80s too, which we probably all remember as kids, or at least people in my age group do, where, we were reuse, recycle, and, replace all that kind of stuff. And turn the lights off and don't run the water, and move to, away from chlorophoric carbons and, or whatever. I think I might have said that wrong, but you know what I'm talking about. And, moving to LED lights today, like you said, appliances becoming more efficient, definitely cuts down on the usage. And you made an awesome point on the G7 countries being the westernized countries, producing less from an industry manufacturing perspective. Because population hasn't gone down during this, right? Energy use is obviously up, but per capita it's sideways, which is a interesting trend.
Yeah, I agree, but the energy's argument's not my strong suit. But the next chart as well is world per capita energy consumption. So just breaking down how basically it was all biofuels early on, and then just mass energy consumption and just the increases in oil and natural gas is like the most notable.
This is depressing. Like, why is nuclear, and there's no geothermal or solar or wind on here, you know, and nuclear, which is the cleanest of all these, has basically gone down while the biofuels in the oil industry, heavy political maneuvered things are just growing like gangbusters. So
Yes.
Nuclear stands no chance when you have both the ESG side and the fossil fuel side wanting to nuke it. It stands no chance. There's not an actual like nuclear lobby strong enough to withstand, that.
Yeah, it's really showing in Germany, because they shut down a majority of their nuclear plants, and they're arguably hit the hardest by the Russian-Ukraine, besides Ukraine and Russia, obviously, just because they were relying heavily on Russian oil. But yeah, they have a lot of unused nuclear plants, so it's just fascinating the move away from nuclear and shutting down the factories to continuously use oil.
And I know the petrodollar is coming, so this is just a good little tease. If we held the standard, which much of the argument for nuclear is much of the issues that could happen. Chernobyl was a key point where really a narrative change where people were terrified, and that is obviously permeating still today. If we apply the same standard to the oil industry, we would have no more oil because of what they dump and all the craziness that they do over and over and over. It's not even just one time or a random time. I think every about 3 or 4 years we get news of a major dump, and even recently, our own government, the Navy, just dumped some oil in their own base, in the water in their own base in Hawaii. So that just recently came out. So that's definitely something to look into if you care about those kind of issues. But this is kind of a point that we can move towards energy efficiency that can really help absolutely everyone. But there's a lot of attacks from a lot of different levels.
And also do think that a lot of us are probably going to have that more U.S. centric view as far as energy consumption, but from the perspective of the entire world, a lot of these countries that they're behind as far as their industrialization eras, and so they are lots of times more reliant on the more traditional fossil fuel means for energy production. And even in situations where they might have tried to go towards some of the potentially cleaner alternatives like nuclear, the ramifications if things go wrong are catastrophic. I mean, and we don't even have to go as far back as Chernobyl to see that, because more recently the Fukushima disaster. I mean, the fallout as a result of that nuclear reactor that was essentially taken out by a tsunami. They're still trying to clean that up, and they're literally sending lead-plated robots into the water, and we're talking about years after the fact, and they're literally burning up before they can even clean out some of the radioactive materials to basically make it safe for people to get in that area.
Yeah, it definitely goes both ways. That's a good point. And something else on oil, I mean, U.S.-based companies are notorious for, offshore accidents, as well as, Exxon specifically had massive abuses in Venezuela and other kind of developing countries, going in, drilling oil, and just absolutely destroying the surrounding environment from waste and just lack of care, pretty much. But we can keep it moving on to ideology positions of the major parties. Kind of have a diverse panel up here of different thoughts, but I feel we all kind of lean similar in a direction. But yeah, kind of want to get into this.
So sure, I'll take the nuclear football first. What jumped out to me on this one is interesting is I think that most people don't understand their own ideology, and this goes back to me thinking that you should have to take some type of a test to actually understand what you are, because I think most people just mimic and copy and reflect the people around them that they think have similar ideology, but they don't actually understand it. Because to me, you have, I could see maybe the distancing from the 70s on, right? I get that. What I don't get is how you correlate this to monetary policy and not also see that similar distancing from, say, the 30s and 33 when Roosevelt, confiscated gold or confiscated it's a bit much, but he bought everybody's gold for $20.67 a troy ounce. And then once he had everybody's gold internalized for the government, then repriced it with a fixed price of $35, thereby transferring wealth, not from the rich to the poor, but from the citizen class to the government at a rate of 40% in the flip of a switch. So if you were going to take the stance that these ideologies were tied to monetary policy in the sense that this is trying to make, you would think that that trend of bifurcating since the 70s would have actually started sooner, either in the 30s with Roosevelt or maybe in the early 1900s with Jekyll Island. But to me, I see we were pretty far apart post-Civil War, obviously. Worked our way towards the middle, kind of united and somewhat overlapped, and everybody really, you could have flipped the coin and been red, blue, or anywhere in between World War II and the 70s for the most part. But to me, I think everybody kind of sees what they want to see, and everybody finds a way to politicize every issue. But there was a pretty long stretch there where there were plenty of reasons to be politically disparate that we weren't as a people. Even if you look back to like the 30s, where the one thing that does make sense here is the 30s where there was so much overlap where you couldn't tell the difference between red and blue, because you had FDR on the platform of non-interventionist, leave everything alone, just, don't touch monetary policy, versus he ran against Hoover, right? So he ran against the platform that was taking criticism for its interventionism, and he was critical of it. But then when he won, found it easier to just stay on the course that his president.
Michael, are you still speaking? I can't hear you.
Okay, I was wondering if what
You got rugged.
he had a hell of a run.
That was juicy too.
Can we get a round of applause for Michael? He's killing it up here. He gave it his all. Twitter just couldn't handle it.
Round of slaps.
In lieu of hundies.
Hell of a run.
Well, I'll pick up a few comments until Michael comes back. I think this is super fascinating, especially because from after World War II until about 1970, both lines start going less conservative, which I really thought it would have only been the blue line, because that was the period of time of the civil rights movement, beginning of middle of the women's movement, the Vietnam War, all of these things that I suppose the entire country started to slightly lean less conservative. But then after about 1970, with that division, was the time that a lot more social issues became super and caused a lot of polarization. So that's what I take away from this. And then, of course, with all the other graphs of fiscal policy, like, created more wealth inequality, and wealth inequality also feeds into certain narratives that are either on the right or the left.
Yeah, great point. It's about as non-political as it gets, so kind of just here to tag along. But we can kind of come back to it and let Michael finish up if he ever figures out the whole technology thing. Boomers, but
yeah. Twitter just realized it was getting too real in here, too presidential, too political, too politically nuclear, as you put it. They rugged him hard. Big Brother's always watching, I guess. I hope we could get it back up and running and we could continue that. I was really into it. But let's keep it rolling.
Yeah, let's move on to slide or thread 16, the top left chart. So public presidential elections, and it just kind of shows the switch from, arguably more important areas to just straight economy focused, while everything else going down. But this is up until 1980, so it's not, it's not the most up to date chart. But if anybody has any comments on that.
Wait, are you Pepe on bottom right on 15?
No, we were gonna skip over that. I moved on to 16, top left. Sorry.
Oh, right on. Okay, cool.
Well, we can keep it moving.
Yeah. Oh, I just added the slide 16 up to the top, so we're keeping pace. The presidential election one you were talking about. It's just really interesting how you see the civil rights, only peak in the 60s, and it's just remaining on the bottom. It's just kind of sad, but let's not get depressed here. Let's keep rolling. Those are my only thoughts around it.
Check 1, 2. Am I back?
Yeah, we hear you, buddy. Let's get them.
Sorry, I must have said nuclear and just all the political buzzwords too much for Twitter's delicate little ears.
Did you have any more comments on that previous graph that you were commenting on?
No, I just think that most folks are politically full of shit and don't even understand their own ideology. And I think if everybody just took 2 seconds to actually understand a little bit of history, they'd be so much less entrenched and dug into their own opinions than they currently are.
And it's interesting because when you have decent conversations with open-minded people from both sides, you usually find somewhere in the middle almost every time, just through talking through these issues at a human to human level. So that's my thought behind it.
I think the big thing is we were coming together through the civil rights movement, and towards the middle of the century, the prosperous 50s, post-Korean War, and then all of a sudden we get taken off the gold standard and things become more expensive, jobs become harder to find as the boomers enter the workforce, and then you start to get more division, and and the separation of the political spectrum since was the key takeaway. We were getting so close to unity there, and saying who cares about party, let's work together, and then it all went to hell.
I mean, that also kind of starts getting into what's known as terror management theory, which essentially kind of touches on the in-group versus out-group dynamics that a lot of people of differing political viewpoints might have. And essentially what it boils down to is, competition for limited resources. And at the end of the day, as the economy became a more prominent talking point for people in politics, that was something that they were able to harp on and capitalize on for their various constituencies to try to get those votes. They're going to put you in a position to where you are going to benefit for those that in that competition for those scarce resources.
Yeah, it's funny that we were heading towards before JFK was shot, right? He wanted to get rid of the Federal Reserve, and we were talking about, hey, we don't need Social Security, and all these positive things that were happening, and then lo and behold, what happens? He doesn't last. And then since then, we've had almost, as shown here by the yellow line, all of the political elections. The most important problem since the 70s has been the economy. Big surprise. Anyhow, think that's some good discussion. I like those 2 slides. I think we did it without having to be political, just looking at the data, being objective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're kind of wanting to skip over a number of pages in the Federal Registry. And me and Michael weren't strong on the closing or the voting in the U.S. Senate since 1917. Definitely not my area. Ross or Obi-Wan, if y'all have comments on that. So it's slide 16, the bottom left.
I don't have anything to add on that.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add, but the only thing I would add would probably be the fact that we vote these politicians into office, but it's always interesting to see what bills and legislative issues they do vote for, regardless of whether it's for, against, or abstaining, versus the ones that don't even show up to vote for.
And it just speaks to being party lines, basically. We become heavily partisan and politicizing every topic since we've shifted off the gold standard and talking about the economy. Everything's political because of the dollar and the jobs in the economy.
Yeah, you know what? I was debating whether or not to circle back to this, but while I was lost in the blockchain there, I did get a DM asking me to kind of further elaborate on what I meant about people losing sight of what their own political ideologies were and what the histories were of their own purported parties. But it ties too relevantly into this to let it go. So, like going back to the FDR thing, where he basically just inherited the platform of his predecessor and stuck with what they had been doing instead of what he actually ran on. You know, at the time, the left of center was what he ran as, and he ran as a non-interventionist and didn't plan on doing all these things. But then he actually did, obviously via the New Deal and a number of other things, severely change the course of history economically for the United States, to the point where once we had deviated to the extent that we had from a sound dollar, and once we had outlawed gold and confiscated or purchased at a discount all the gold from our country, we went into a period of history where countries no longer trusted each other's currencies as reserve assets. And what that led to was a period of isolationism and populism that now, post MAGA world, would be severely identified as a right of center trait in someone, right? And a right of center stereotype. Except at the time, it would have never been considered a right of center philosophy because it was bred from left of center at the time politics. So everybody gets lost in these identities of left, right, center, but really what people lack is the understanding of how economic ideologies tend to breed more of these traits, quote unquote traits, in the parties than the actual, what they think are first principles for each party. So if you would have looked at the period of isolationism and populism that happened not just in the United States but throughout the developed world post the 30s, when no one really trusted each other's currencies to serve as reserve, it would be probably even more isolationist and populist than the negatively spun, America first and pro-populism. And that didn't only happen here either. I know that Trump is a caricature of a person and he's a lightning rod, but that happened throughout Europe as well. There were parties founded all over the place that kind of caught this big populist wave, but it was seen as a major right of center characteristic that I don't think it really is a left or right of center characteristic. It's really more of an economic one.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting to look at protectionism as well. But we saw the idea of the free market and free trade, but we are very interventionist in protecting the markets that we favor, the industries that we favor, the people that we favor who run all of those things.
Oil.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, but yes, leading on to what we will cover. And that is actually one of the biggest issues of this type of kind of protectionism.
Yeah. All right. Well, it looks like Pepe's lost in the blockchain now, so it's my turn. So we, where did we leave off? We were skipping the cloture vote, right? It was fairly boring.
Yeah. And just for definition purposes, it's a procedure for ending a debate and taking a vote. For y'all wondering what that word means. So yeah, now we're in the bottom right graph or picture that says the top 4% rating these objectives to be essential or very important. It's not top 4%. It's the top 4 for the percent. I said that wrong. So these are the top 4 of the percent of ratings of these objectives. So
well, I don't think I've ever seen a slide that has Ross's name on it more than this one. So I'm going to put you on the spot and just kick it to you, Ross.
Well, I think what jumps out to me the most isn't so much the increase of the importance of being financially well off, but it's more so the decline in the importance of essentially like in the philosophy of your life. I mean, what's the purpose of your life? That's something that's, outside of, political ideology or socioeconomic status or education. Everybody should have some type of, drive, something that, purpose to their lives. And, it's not, or it shouldn't necessarily be, from my perspective, all about just chasing the dollar. But sure enough, around 1970, we start to see that spike, and it correlates with the focus of a lot of our political thought leaders, focusing on the importance of the economy. That that took kind of the forefront of a lot of people's thoughts of what their purpose was, as opposed to some actual intrinsically motivated idea. And it kind of also kind of ties in with the line regarding the importance of being an authority in your field or being an expert in your field. I mean, why did that drop down? Is it because people started attaining these levels of expertise and authority, but then they realized that maybe they didn't have that internal locus of control to actually effectuate change? And so it almost kind of turns into this learned helplessness. I think that kind of aligns a little bit more so with, or at least that was my interpretation, kind of aligns with this notion of, that this philosophy of life. People have their blinders on because they're trying to keep their, plates full of food, roof over their head, clothes on their back. We have to maintain, or at least meet some of our primary needs before we can even start to get into the more existential and philosophical views of why we're here.
So I didn't see who had their hand up first. Ross, that was excellent.
Yeah,
so
I wanted to piggyback of that. That was fascinating, Ross, and I'll be real quick because what you said painted something to me of what I see. If you look at the light blue and you look at the green together, how do you try to remove that question from individuals in order to produce as many worker bees as you need? Think of that correlation. That's what I see.
Wonder Woman.
Yeah, and it's what's that?
I said Wonder Woman. What do you see?
Oh, hey there. I see. It's terribly sad. I see that it's really a big shame that the wanting to be very well off financially and developing a meaningful philosophy of life has this inverse correlation, that people are seeing them as an either or and not as a both and. That it's being seen as one or the other. So at that year, right around 1980 to 90, some sort of massive increase in materialism and wanting to build wealth, especially because the Green Line says specifically being very well off financially. It's not just being able to live a certain standard of life, being able to, have an even keel level of life. It's being very well off. That's what I took away.
Yeah, and for me, just to jump in real quick, I think that this actually contradicts what we're going to probably end up talking about in some of the later slides, because you see kind of just a pretty parallel line about the importance for people on raising a family. And I think that a lot of the later charts lend themselves to the narrative that there's been this breakdown of the family unit, or what was the traditional family unit from parts of history. So seeing that yellow line pretty much not deviate by much, to me, comes as a surprise, or at least as a counterpoint to what some of the later charts seem to indicate.
Yeah, I see that. And I see also, I'm trying to play devil's advocate here for this blue line compared to, raising a family, becoming an authority, and helping others. I wonder, if those three kind of fall into developing a meaningful philosophy of life. So that, I think, maybe could skew things, but overall the narrative's clear. And it reminds me of what we talked about. It always goes back to my segment of the Dark Ages, right? It makes me think about the Renaissance. What if you're going to make this graph from the transition out of the Black Plague into the Renaissance, where everyone essentially became fat and happy, there was abundance, that baseline was achievable for everybody, and you had art and science and so much compared to what was happening the 900 years, 1,000 years before. Now that's not to say that there's an amazing art and intellectual advances happening now, but a lot of that, I think, is probably contributed to technology. So if you could imagine having all the technology that we do now, and decrease the what's required for a baseline of living, and making sure everybody has enough to actually say, like, hey, I want to be an artist, right? I mean, I went to college and I thought to myself, do I want to be a starving artist, or do I want to pick something formulaic and into the science department? And I definitely felt that green line, not necessarily out of greed, but more along the lines of necessity. But when you add that very well off financially, that kind of skews it a little bit too. So that's my thoughts around that.
All right, with that, I think we should hop to the next one. We're making decent time, but I think we got to work on pace a little bit, so we'll stick to the meaty ones. This next one, I'm sure, since he didn't get to opine on the educational conversation from last week, Ross is probably just chomping at the bit. But inflation adjusted per pupil spending, staff to student ratio, and achievement of 17-year-olds. Tag, you're it.
Okay, hold on one second. Let me make sure I'm pulling up the right one. We're on slide
17, top left.
17, top left. Ooh, okay. Well, I will say this is just some kind of food for thought. I was actually getting compensated more as a doctoral candidate than some of the actual professors were getting compensated, essentially, because I was getting compensated by some of my educational stipends and things of that nature. But now what you're seeing, and it's not just unique to like community colleges or private liberal arts colleges, but even at R1 institutes, there's a growing trend of essentially getting adjunct professors. The notion of the tenured professor being all in their ivory towers and live in cush situations, that's not realistic, and it's in large part due to some of the changes with how higher education is funded, and the easy access to money from the government that some of the private lenders started having access to. That's when you really start seeing the cost of higher education outpace even the rates of inflation. And I know that there was a pretty curious tone-deaf tweet from one of the senators talking about, how when she went to school, she, could work a summer job and then, $50 a credit or something to that effect.
I think her Indian name is speaks from ass. Let's be specific.
I didn't want to get booted. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of be in the midst of that, because myself, I do teach in higher education for an R1 institute, but it is not my primary employer. And I have a lot of colleagues that they have tried to go into a pure academic type professional life, and the compensation isn't there, because it's, even though these prices have skyrocketed for higher education, it hasn't been going to increasing the quality of teaching, unfortunately. What it's going to is padding administrators' pockets at these institutions, and oftentimes, to build student facilities to lure more and more students to their particular institutions, regardless of education. Why the hell do schools need lazy rivers at their student centers and multi-million-dollar student centers, when you end up in classrooms that might have upwards of 300 students? The largest class I've ever taught in higher education had about 360 students in it. I hate teaching those large of classes. How can I give the type of personalized education? How can I instill, that passion that I have for my particular field into those potential students, to hopefully then become experts themselves down the road? It's all about this strictly checking boxes and matriculating through this notion of what we're supposed to do. And it just feeds into us, kind of what Felix was talking to us, just kind of adopting more of this worker bee mindset. But that's just kind of the nature of the beast, and it's not just with higher education. That's why I've also tried to mention on a couple of occasions why we need to be careful with the gamification of things like investing. It's not always in our best interests. But anyhow, I could definitely go on this a lot longer. I know we're pressed for time, but that was my brief little spiel from my soapbox.
Yeah, a quick point on the last kind of point you made about gamifying. So I graduated college a little less than a year ago, and the only people that were investing that I knew were investing in AMC, GameStop, the next crazy 10x. It's all about trading different stocks and options. It's not, there's no fundamentals or underlying knowledge behind it. It's just, what does social media say?
That's not even investing. That's college kids that watched The Big Short and decided that they would, all go in on something and speculate, right?
And I'm not going to make a huge, overgeneralization, but just to kind of give a perspective of, some of the students I encounter. I mean, I have situations where some students literally have no idea what noon means. They didn't know whether or not noon meant 12 in the middle of the day or, at night, midnight. I mean, there's just like certain life experiences are, that, I mean, I sometimes that I take for granted what I think should be, just kind of understood. And, the priorities aren't there in a lot of regards for, a lot of essential daily skills that people need to kind of break free from, this system that is not built to really see them succeed.
It's all geared towards mommy and daddy signing the check for tuition, and the kids go have a good time and get their piece of paper so they can get past the HR screening for a job interview, right? That's really what the factory is. It's an institution to pay college football coaches a big salary.
And some people will say that that's just coming from athletic boosters, but when you talk about a lot of these large state institutions, I mean, a lot of it's also coming directly from our own tax dollars.
Yeah, trickle down economics.
Yeah, let me give you an example. The highest paid state employee of the state of Connecticut is the UConn's women's coach.
Highest paid employee in the state of Alabama is Nick Saban.
There you go.
Roll Tide.
That was just for you, Mike.
I love you. So here's the thing that this makes me just kind of, it blows my mind now as an adult, but to know where I came from. But I came from an immigrant background. I've described my background on previous spaces. I don't need to go there. But basically, like a lot of other immigrant families, was brought here, and like the whole family dream was this big collaborative effort on the part of the family to just get anybody to go to college and graduate college. And it was this massive achievement on behalf of the family. And I think in my singular generation, as an only child that went from the first in my family to ever go to and graduate college, to then being an entrepreneur to now being a parent myself, I think that I could honestly, without an ounce of hesitation, say that I have zero desire for my kids to go to college. Not that I would prevent them from going to college, and not that there isn't an appropriate, there are certain career paths that you have to go to college if you want to participate in those paths or in those industries. But I think that academia has been so overly bloated with things that don't require academic courses of study, especially in today's day and age. And given the technology and the amount of information at our fingertips, that you can get a better, it's completely cliche, but the whole fucking Goodwill Hunting, I could get the same education for $25 in late fees at the local library, has never been more true than now, when the entire world's worth of information is in your pocket. And you can't necessarily trust the validity of any information. We live in a world where nobody can tell truth from fiction, and that academia is not immune to that. If anything, I would say it's even more prone to spreading whatever they want. Truth is written by the victors and all that. And I think academia contributes to that exact same thing. Academia is just as much in the pocket of different political agendas or lobbies for certain industries. I'm not even talking like the stereotypical academia is all on the left and whatever. Let's move on past that. But I'm talking like industrial universities that I know of, even within my own industry, where the universities themselves are so horrendously in the pocket of the industry that they serve, be it tech, aviation, oil, gas, farming, agriculture. Holy shit, is there something more corrupt than that?
The boosters, man. But it's true, you can get an Ivy League education on YouTube. You may not get an Ivy League accountability, but you can get the education. So you can buy the books, you can watch the videos, you can watch the lectures of the 360 student classes, right? You don't have to pay for that anymore. And hell, there's a lot of kids that just don't even go to class. They just study the materials and take the test.
Oh, out of my current class of approximately 50 students, I do not take attendance because I like to think that my students are adults. I treat them as such. But out of 50 students on average, I get about 25 regularly showing up. Because it's just that matriculation. It's not necessarily a desire to try to learn. It's trying to fulfill certain, general ed requirements and things of that nature. But I guess what I'm taking away from this is, I should probably cry myself to sleep because I'm trying over here. I really am. But I work for the government and I also teach to supplement my income. But I feel like if I wasn't Colonel Forbin, I would probably be Ron Swanson. Because I'm not blind to all the inefficiencies and issues with the systems that I'm working in. I would like to think that I'm trying to make them better, but at the end of the day, I'm just a cog in this greater machine.
It's the same for big corporations, Ross. I'm sorry. We're all in the rat race. But very good discussion. I think Pepe is going to tell us we're ready to move on to maybe a future slide.
No, I mean, I absolutely love that conversation. I'm glad we went in depth with that. But yeah, I was definitely going to pass it to see if anybody had some thoughts on it or closing thoughts on it before we moved on.
I think we got some more graphs to look at. Let's keep it rolling.
Yeah, so the next the next two charts are actually I'm lying. So the next chart is number of lawyers and population per lawyer. So it's showing the drastic shift from 1970 for total lawyers and lawyers per capita.
Well, we showed a couple slides ago that people sold their souls in search of higher income. So this is no truer than in this lawyer chart, but I don't think there's much need to dwell here.
Yeah, and I think we'll hit on it two charts from now with incarceration. So we'll hold that thought and move on to physics. PhDs conferred in the U.S. From 1900 to 2012. This is the bottom left chart. So it shows in 1971, it was like at the absolute peak, and then it drastically went down from there. But it also shows the U.S. citizens compared to non-U.S. citizens and how that non-U.S. citizens has drastically caught up to U.S. citizens.
So I'll be quick on this one because I don't think we need to dwell here either, but it's clear that we've outsourced our intelligence or at least deflected them into different career paths. If anybody's got an interest, I would suggest that you watch one of the recent episodes of What Bitcoin Did. It's a Peter McCormick podcast. It's not just Bitcoin maxi bullshit. And this episode actually had very little to do with Bitcoin, but he recently interviewed Eric Weinstein, and it's an incredibly thought-provoking couple hours. And Eric's a prominent physicist. He talks about how governments around the world need to try to make academics and especially science-related academics fat and happy because there's probably a total of 20 minds in the world that have the potential to change to like seismically shift the direction of the future of humanity. And that's happened in the past with, the internet came out of CERN and Operation Paperclip yielded the space program and the Apollo program landing on the moon and the Manhattan Project and all these things where, the top 20 minds on the planet yield these things that then shift the course of the future. So I would suggest everybody watch it. I've passed it along to a couple people on the panel. What's fascinating, no matter what your ideology is, you'll find parts of it that you either incredibly agree with or get incredibly triggered by. So it's not like it's one direction. He's just incredibly unique and independent in his line of thought. He doesn't really care what he's supposed to think and what his ideology is supposed to be. He's kind of all over the place, but it's a fascinating 2-hour listen if you've got the time.
And just to give a little bit of frame of reference real quick, typically in most PhD programs, regardless of discipline, unless it's actually more of a degree mill type situation, which there are pay for doctorate type programs, they're not as well received when you go out to try to utilize them. But once again, it's just kind of a cash grab from some of those higher education sources. So always do your own research, even with where you go to potentially school. But typically the cohort size for most doctoral programs is only going to be 2 to 4 students each year. And that doesn't necessarily guarantee that people actually complete their doctorate. It's not like getting accepted into med school or law school where, more often than not, if you paid the money, they're going to find a way to get you through that. There might be some imposter syndrome that you have to fight through, but a lot of these hard science disciplines, just because people are accepted into a PhD program doesn't mean that degree is going to be conferred. From our own cohort, out of 4 of us, only 2 of us actually ended up completing their doctorates.
Michael, if you can confirm, I just put a tweet up there of the video that you were speaking of and that you shared with me. Posted about a week ago.
Yep, that's the one.
There you go, guys.
It's pretty fascinating. It's interesting. It's thought-provoking. It'll excite you. It'll piss you off. It'll do everything. It's kind of a Joe Rogan-y kind of format. So it's not terribly Bitcoin-y for anybody that's not interested in hearing a maxi just talk down on them for 2 hours. It's I think pretty good for all audiences.
Yeah, deeper existential, thought-provoking stuff. It's not necessarily all Bitcoin can fix this kind of stuff. Actually, most of it isn't. I listened to it all. It was great. Thank you, Michael, by the way.
Yep.
Moving forward.
All right. So incarceration rate of inmates incarcerated under state and federal jurisdiction per 100,000 population. So it just shows in 1970, from 1925 to 1970 was a relatively stagnant line for men. The overall incarceration rate and women, they all, stayed about consistent. And then 1971 happened, and it was a massive shift upwards in total incarceration rate and significantly more male, while women's has rose slightly.
This chart can't be true because we're the land of the free.
So I'll go into this one some. The reaction to the civil rights movement, and truly there was more crime during that time. We were going into a recession, etc. But that also created a certain level of justification for politicians to use that to don't want to throw a bomb word, but to weaponize it and to use it for justification to implement programs that then the effect was really massively rising prison inmate rates. So that was the time of the war on drugs, and there was already the tough on crime sort of stance. But then with the there was a connection between civil rights activism and street crime that was happening in cities. And at the same time, there was an exodus of a lot of people from city centers, which led to less legitimate ways of making money, less actual jobs that were available, and then increased crime as well in inner cities. So all of that was going on. And side note, that whole stance of being tough on crime was a really effective political strategy. And a ton of presidents up through Clinton used it on their in their campaign discourse really effectively. So yeah, that's a major reason. And the reason why it keeps going up is because there continue to be more policies that both increased rate of incarceration and especially increased the length of people's sentencing.
Yeah, I also want to point out there was also a stark difference where we started to privatize this as well. I don't know the back of my mind the exact date when that started to happen. Before, prisons used to be, under the purview of whether state or local, municipal, etc. And then became the wave of the private prisons and lobbies and et cetera, which only exacerbated the campaigning, the politicians, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that started in a little bit more of a larger way in the 90s, a little bit later, but still was one of those, it's a good point. It was one of those contributing factors to the Great Incline.
All right. So with that, any other thoughts on the incarceration rate? We can keep it moving.
No, I think I'm good.
All right. Appreciate that insight. So we'll move on to thread 18. So share of young adults living with parents rises to levels never seen since the Great Depression. So it shows 1970. It was bottoming out or nearly. And then since then, it's drastically shifted upwards. I think we've kind of discussed the different factors kind of playing a toll on that. But any other insight want to be added?
I kind of want to trigger Ross and say millennials.
I'm not going to take that bait. We got to move along.
All right. So median age of first marriage shows in from 1890 to the 1970s. Is relatively consistent, just slowly decreasing, and then since then it's drastically and just consistently increased. So up until 2019, the average age for a male was 30, while females is 28, compared to 1970, where it was around 21 for women and 23 for men.
We went into a lot of the graphs and charts from last week that talked a lot about the changes that happened with gender around 71. And so with things for women, like gaining more financial independence, going to college more, access to birth control, these things, I see them all combining together to tip this number upward in terms of age for both men and women.
Yeah, I agree. I think that did a good job summarizing, and I agree we have kind of hit on it along with the next chart, divorce prevalence by age, and just how that's drastically and consistently rose, except for the 18 to 34. That's stayed relatively consistent, but the other age groups have significantly rose.
Is that because you can't afford to get divorced that young? You got to be old enough to do it because you have the funds to pay the lawyer.
Well, I mean, that's part of it. I think part of it is too. This is the start of what is currently touted as the breakdown of the family unit. That I think gets overblamed for some things, but also is conveniently ignored by depending on what your strategy is. So there's obviously been an increase in divorce. You can't really statistically argue with that. You also can't blame it for everything. But I think that both sides of that argument tend to just talk past each other, as we do with most things. I'd be also curious to see, based on the last slide and this one, what the correlation is to participation rates in organized religions, because you had kind of, for a very long time, a very commonplace religious expectation to wed early and produce offspring. So there's a lot of overlap of the time here of increase in divorce rates, decrease in participation in the marital system, and the access to abortion post Roe v. Wade. And there's a number of really social, political, ethical hot topics that all kind of overlapped around the same period of time. But I think we do start to dive into correlation more than causation on a lot of these. But I think these are also still probably some of the more fascinating ones to dive into.
It's also the women's right movement and giving the, access to their own money and credit and voting power, right? Women's suffrage. There's a lot of that kind of empowerment that goes along with not having to stay in a crappy relationship just because, there's societal expectations of it.
And then also looping back to the massive increase in lawyer chart, that coincided with the rate of incarceration and the rate of divorce. So, is it the chicken or the egg? I don't know, but there was a great increase in need for lawyers and need for this legal structure in place. And there's a quote unquote moral decline, which Michael did touch upon. But when you have, and I say that in quotes because there's a lot that goes into that. But along with that comes the need for some other structure to come along. So hence lawyers. But I see them all as really colliding.
And to that point, as far as lawyers go, who tends to make the most money? The lawyers for the defendant or the plaintiffs? Well, usually it's the defendant's lawyers that are going to be getting paid more. I mean, lots of times it's the government that is going to be the plaintiff in a lot of cases where we're talking about criminal cases, and a lot of them are disproportionately burdened with their caseloads relative to a lot of defense lawyers that are able to potentially allocate more resources because the people that they are litigating for potentially have those resources, or if they don't, then they get incarcerated.
Yeah, no, that's a great conversation, and I totally agree.
You could also think a little bit about, the increase in litigation as well. We've become very, very suit happy. Not that we actually do have a history of being that way from a long, long time, but I'm pretty sure that's been expanded upon recently. That it just exploded.
All right, but we got to kind of keep it moving. Running short on time. So percentage of children born to unwed women. So it shows in 1970 the white overall and the black, and it just shows how it's drastically going up. But it also shows the disproportionate amount for certain groups. Anybody wants to add to this?
So yeah, I do. I know that every group that has faced inequity or inequality in the past has had a number of different reasons that went into why the decks were stacked differently for each group, right? And nobody wants to talk about this topic, and everybody's super trigger happy and cancel happy. But the reality of the situation is that to me, when I look at this chart, whatever the fundamental reason behind the distance between the lines initially was, post 1971, with the combination of circumstances that we've talked about, the acceleration of those lines was exacerbated by post 1971 America, right? So to me, I don't really think that this is the forum to get into why the decks were stacked differently. But it's also not, to me, even a racial discussion to notice that post 1971, all the decks just got fucking lit on fire. Like, there were obviously different circumstances going in, but they were disproportionately or maybe accelerated in different. They all still pretty much rhyme though. And that's what kind of jumps out to me at this chart. If you were disenfranchised prior, you got more disenfranchised at a rate that was even faster post 1971.
Yeah, I think that's a great, quick analysis of it. But we keep it moving to thread 19. So children per woman, and how in 1970 it was at nearly 5, and now we're down to 2.5 as of 2015. And from my knowledge, I believe that's still steadily declining. Any input on this?
Yeah, while we're marinating on that too, I did see Baroness was requesting. So Baroness, I brought you up. You got something to add before we get too far ahead?
Thank you. I was just going to bring up a quick reference to the times in the 1970s where women taking over their financials, be able to take control. At the same time, the movements for African Americans, and with the changeover with the economic systems, that our governments have did their own little hedgeway. Even though we gave rights, they also took some rights away at the same time of large corporations that were using the it was actually a construct in legality to give people of color the ability to own properties as it being an entity, because at the point in time when that became a law, they were not considered as people. So what you'll end up seeing during the time frame where more rights were being given, you also see that big firms were actually lawyering up, and more corporations were coming into play with governance.
Yeah, great stuff, and I appreciate you coming up here and speaking of that, sharing some insight with us. It's always appreciated.
Yeah, Baroness, we gotta get you up here more often. It's great hearing you.
I'm just putting my foot in my mouth, but thank you guys for letting me out.
Absolutely. So we'll keep it moving to trends in obesity among children and adolescent age 2 to 19 by age. And you can see in 1970, 71, it's very low, around 5%, and then ever since then it's been significantly increasing.
Anyone want to create a narrative here from this graph?
Yeah, since I have some insight more into the agribusiness and farming side of things, and there was a huge increase in industrialization and being able to cut corners. So replacing sugar with high fructose corn syrup. And although I know that's a very convenient one to blame, it also is one to blame. And other ways that non-natural items were put into food, which led to higher weight in children. So that's the trend that I see.
And it also ties in with what the government was actually subsidizing that sector to grow. There were certain crops that were getting subsidized, whereas others weren't, and it kind of fed into the need to, as we built up surpluses of some of these commodities, is like, okay, well, now we need to find additional uses for it.
And on that note, when you look at social services, financial help for pregnant women, I believe it's the WIC program. I didn't know this till recently. Only certain items that you can purchase within the WIC program. So, and they tend to be very staple items, not fresh produce, etc. And those are the things that the government is subsidizing for pregnant women. And I'll say pregnant women who are lower income can purchase, not to mention the rise in the decrease of price of nutritionally deficient food.
Yep, that's one that I definitely noticed being in Florida, because Publix is the big food chain here. And I remember always, Publix is known for its subs because they've got a great deli counter, but there's always a big placard at every deli counter that reminds the WIC families that they cannot get hot subs. They can only get the cold subs that are more shelf stable. And but it's absolutely something that I didn't really realize until then. But yeah, it's kind of a known thing around the Publixes that the WIC participants can only get the cold sandwiches and not the actual hot ones with any kind of non-shelf stabilized via like sodium nitrate items. Felix, sorry, I saw you got your hand raised. My only other comment was going to be that one of these weeks, and not now because we're already running late, I would love to dive into the Bitcoiner fascination with seed oils that seems to be everywhere. But that's a whole nother, we could do a Monsanto week or something, probably go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I actually wanted to continue touching on that. One of my favorite things to do internationally is have Coca-Cola, because I love Coca-Cola. My daughter's also having a talk with her friends on her fake cell phone. And the fact that internationally it's made out of actual sugar, like how it used to, which is the original recipe, but here in the United States it's made with high fructose corn syrup, and it's disgusting. It's I don't drink it as much, but I'll drink it. But when I go internationally, man, it's like such a difference, and you can tell, like speaking to Ross's point, that we really do protect some of these industries. We really do protect some of these markets, and it actually ends up hurting us more than we're thinking that it's helping.
Yep. Geneva, I saw you requested a mic. Welcome to the panel.
Yes, thank you. You also had the 2-income family going in there. So while mom was at home making all those more nutritious meals, hopefully, when mom went to work, mom was TV dinnering, and there was all the cooking wasn't going on as much as it was before. Major change there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was just trend towards fast food, and we traded quality for convenience as a culture.
Well, convenience, because there's only so many hours in the day, and rather than mom being home and doing quote unquote the mom things, I hate to say that, but now the mom is getting home at picking the kids up from daycare and getting home at 6. And crock pots were really popular then because you could get sort of a nutritious meal by using a crock pot, and dinner was ready when you got home. But it changed big time.
Yep. Baroness, I see you're back. What you got?
Oh, I was just gonna keep Mike for putting 2 cents in here and there, but as far as Geneva and you folks are going about is the change in innovations that women actually gain the right to be able to work, and that these conveniences were coming in. The United States government was capitalizing the best they can off the new structure of the homestead. Reducing down to average homestead of 3 children and 2 working parts of the family. And, this is the creation of like Weight Watchers and so forth. But again, I forgot to tie into the remainder of what I was trying to say in the 1970s with corporations and, people of ethnicity. This is also a time frame of the growth that interracial marriages were legalized all over the United States. So, I mean, all these different changes were happening, but the tapering effect, they found that it was the best time to slip this in.
It's interesting that that you just brought that up, the interracial marriages. It just came up this week during our Supreme Court nominations. One senator proposed that it should go back to the states to determine whether they should be banned or not,
Are
which
you
is pretty
kidding
controversial.
Me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was
really.
Yes. You guys can just look that up and discern for yourselves. But this actually goes to much of the political topics that we've been talking about. How we're going further to one side, where certain things that have socially been accepted for a while, or will be regurgitated as, basically as bullet points for political purposes.
That's for a later date of a subject, because this could go all day. I know that you guys have a panel of pre-designated charts, etc.
No, it's all good though. Appreciate you coming up here and sharing.
And I agree, because boy, I could go off on that one big time. So
sounds like we have a topic for a whole other discussion one day. Then
I'll turn my mic off.
Let's go to the next one, and I'll just agree to be mad at Big Pharma. So what do we have here? We have healthcare, U.S. national health expenditures. It's almost as if as we got unhealthier, it became financially incentivized to sell us both the sickness and the cure. Weird. I can't imagine ever in history something where an illness or purported illness would be maybe overly dramatized for the sake of selling more shit.
There's a lot of Netflix documentaries on this subject, by the way, guys.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there'll be even more in 75 years when they're allowed to release the results of everything that we've gone through for the last 2 or 3 years.
Definitely so, but that kind of wraps up 6 hours of breaking down WTF happened in 1971, and the correlation with different things, as well as the repercussions and how it affects everyone. So I know that was a lot to sit through, but I feel like we got a lot of great knowledge out going through it, and definitely looking forward to building on this series with Petrodollar next week. So we can pass it around and do some closing statements if everybody's ready to wrap it up.
Enjoy this party, and had a really enjoyable time listening to all you guys and all the different perspectives. I really felt that numbers bring us together no matter where you're from. So it was just kind of great seeing the graphs to drive these kind of conversations. And shout out to Crypto Airborne for doing a fantastic job streaming this. I have it up on the other screen, and right now you're showing the meat chicken consumption one. Now you just flashed over to mine because you always highlight who's talking. Just seriously, you guys check out Airborne's channel, subscribe, and he even has a thread that has all of our old education spaces all streamlined together. A couple quick shameless community announcements. We have Wonder Woman leading our Friday buy ritual. So, keep an eye out for that. I'm sure Wonder Woman's going to speak to that when she closes for the night. Also, Lagatha is, so awesome that she is helping us coordinate a West Coast Heroes meetup. I should put the tweets to the top, but yeah, it's not like a big one. It's more of an informal West Coast hangout in San Diego. We're still kind of coordinating. It's a little speculative and hypothetical, but hoping to get some traction. But as far as like a big bang super VGX Heroes event, I'm thinking Vegas at a much later time. But I think that's all I got for closing out the night. Besides, thanks again for this awesome panel and host for making it happen, and Sun Tzu, of course, holding it down from the Heroes account. And strength and honor, everybody.
Appreciate you as always being up here, Felix.
Thank you guys for having me again tonight. Definitely appreciate everyone who joined. And we're here every week. We would love to get any ideas for any future topics. There's always so much to cover, so much to go over. We'll be covering certain things coming up in a couple of weeks. But if anyone thinks there's a great topic that could benefit the community, just give us a shout out to anyone on the panel, and we will definitely look into providing the content for you. We appreciate all the support.
And thank you for being up here, Felix. We appreciate you and love the information and insight you bring every week. So appreciate you again. Wonder Woman.
Hey there. Yeah, I really appreciate being able to hop in and offer my perspective, my body of knowledge as it is relevant to this topic. And anytime anything like financially, fiscally, socially that wraps up all together, I think is insanely fascinating, especially to look at things from a chart point of view, because it really takes politics and judgment out of it, because it's just numbers. So love the process. Grateful to y'all. I am leading the Friday buy this week. If you want to see me throw a car, you're going to participate, because it's only happening if we get to 100 people. I'm going to leave you with that teaser. Have a great night.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Appreciate you as always, Obi-Wan.
No, I really appreciate everyone showing up for these and adding to the discussion and the work that goes into it from the panel and the diversity that we have in the community. I even got my wife interested in listening to crypto talk for a change. So well done, everybody. And yeah, just appreciate y'all.
Absolutely. And we appreciate you as well and all your knowledge and insight. I know it's appreciated from me as long with the community. So thank you as always. Michael?
Well, I feel like it's only appropriate to end the night with a conspiracy theory. And seeing as you unceremoniously glossed over the last slide of this entire thing that we've spent 6 hours on, which was the egregious proliferation of big chicken, I can only assume via your southern accent and that you growing up close to the Tyson plant that you're somehow on the payroll. But I guess we'll just have to do a whole separate episode about big chicken and the corruptness and you just trying to gaslight us by skipping past that last slide, Pepe. Shame on you.
I try to get past that. I didn't want y'all to dive deep into it.
I think that's what they call the Southern strategy, right?
That's it.
Pepe.
You're talking about the very, very last part of Floki's thread there?
Yeah, meat consumption. Everybody just stopped eating everything except for chicken.
No, I mean beyond the Nixon ones. Just look at Floki's thread and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Hey, just keep enjoying the chicken. Just don't question it.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to you guys. That's just my special way if you scroll all the way down.
But all right, all right. You exposed me for skipping the chicken. But Sun Tzu, wrap it up for us, my friend. I know you have all the energy right now. Oh, the space may be going all night.
Sun Tzu's asleep.
All right. Well, we appreciate you as always. Thanks for hanging in there, listening to once again 6 hours of charts and info. But we look forward to spicing up and having a new topic next week. It ran a little bit longer than we expected, but as always, we appreciate you all and look forward to next week.
Night, everybody.
Strength and honor. Take care, everyone. Keys out.
I'm going to stay here for a second, see if Sun Tzu really did fall asleep.